Welcome back to Disrupt Education. Alli, where in the world are you or have you been? What's going on?
Well, I am in Wisconsin, which is my home base, but I did just get back from, two trips, Houston, Texas, and then I also was at the Minnesota State Fair,
Yeah.
ate all the cheese curds and cookies and saw all the fanny packs. And if you've never been to the Minnesota State Fair, 10 out of 10 experience. I tried the new pickle pizza, which, what a combo. Highly recommend. Anybody out there listening, try pickle pizza. I loved it actually. So yeah, that's what I've been doing. How's school for you, Peter?
It's going. It's actually fun though. It's like my sandbox right now. It's interesting because we're just kind of working on portfolios and building, and I'm really going gradeless to be honest, and I love it. I really like students building who they are and what they are, and it's a mindset shift, which is fun. But it's more conversation. It's more youth. We're all learning from each other, so it's a pretty cool experience right now. Um, Man, I have to say a prayer for the people who don't like pineapple on their pizza right now because you just threw them a big curveball. I had to throw that in there. Like, what? All right, so we'll leave that there. I want to say hi to your grandfather again because I'm going to say he's our number one listener, and we had a great conversation at the previous couple podcasts about him. So hey, what's up? And we have a great guest today. Caden Ketchman is with us. Caden, how are you, man?
I'm great. I haven't had like class in a very long time. I had a 3-month long summer break, so I'm just getting back into it, and I am so excited because I really needed to get back into school.
Yes, yeah. You are in a magnet school. You're studying. You want to study humanities. Give us the runaround of like who is Caden, where you're at right now, because I think you're going to share some pretty amazing stuff. Actually, I know that around disrupting education.
I am a high school senior at an early college called Cumberland Polytechnic High School. Right now, I'm studying mostly humanities, which is is so refreshing because I've had so many semesters of like intense STEM fields, and so I'm really into philosophy and British literature, like within the humanities. But I also really enjoy those intersections with like more like theoretical sciences, and so that's how I kind of tie it all together with like a nice little bow. Um, but yeah, I am a huge advocate for self-education and rogue learning, and I sort of embrace that with my like studies of philosophy outside of school.
It's UX design here. That's where we're going. And Alli, he hasn't taken chemistry yet. We just found out, so you're gonna have to kind of talk first.
I mean, don't maybe chemistry is like the piece that you're missing to kind of tie all this theoretical science together. But I'm really interested. So this whole series, Caden, is about going beyond the score and really trying to connect learning to reality. And it sounds like that is a core tenet and value that you have developed way earlier than many of like my students and probably Peter's students have done in their educational journey. So could you kind of like talk us through like where did this rogue learning idea come from? Where did this how did manifesting your journey and where you're at as a high school senior kind of come to be? Where did it start?
Well, for me, I got really into philosophy my junior year of high school, like right in the beginning. I started watching it. Actually, it's really funny. It came from a YouTuber named RC Walden. I watched a bunch of his videos on philosophy, and he discussed a lot of how he in college has been like self-studying French philosophy, which is how I got into French philosophy. Shout out to Camus. I ended up reading The Myth of Sisyphus, which I think is actually a perfect beginning to rogue education because it's all about how like doing things just for the purpose of doing them for yourself. And through that, I sort of got into learning outside of school completely without a curriculum and jumping right into these complex topics that are interesting to me. And so getting into rogue education was very much just a result of curiosity. I actually did a video called the Breakthrough Junior Challenge, which is Khan Academy. And that's when I got into all this like theoretical physics stuff. And I sort of started to see how I could tie in those like theoretical astrophysics with the math interest that I have, with the philosophy existentialism. And it all kind of came together in a way that allowed me to follow these passions, both through my formal education and outside of the classroom. And so that's how I really got into it. It was kind of those two back-to-back events of making that video on astrophysics and then starting to read philosophy. That's how I got really into this rogue education style.
You figured out how to tear down silos right there. That's amazing, because I think that's something that Alli and I have been talking about on this series is, we know math and science intersect with business, or everything, arts, everything intersects. But like in traditional school, we put up these boundaries like it's math time and then stop, and then we're going to go over here to humanities or whatever. So in that capacity, now you've seen what your traditional educational journey so far, as well as kind of you're building your own, I would dare to say, a non-traditional or self-learner model for yourself. What purpose do you think school serves? And then to what extent do you see the traditional, I think I know the answer to this, but the traditional education system as kind of necessary for the learning process then, or what would make it necessary?
Well, I think that for the general public, public education is extremely important. Getting a baseline education that is uniform across at least across state lines, um, getting this like uniform education, I would say right up until about eighth grade, is incredibly important. And beyond that point in high school, we are told this, I would say a lie, that we are in control of our education. And I think that the public education style of like that formal learning is actually super crucial to finding what those passions are. And I think that is where public education really does a great job, because it shows you all of these different fields in sort of like a required core curriculum kind of way. But if you are able to make those connections to those real life ideologies, then that is where that passion comes from for learning. But I find that by ninth grade, when people are getting into high school, they've already created this, I'm going to use the term barrier a little bit differently here, kind of barrier between themselves and education, where education is something that they have to do and not something that they're following like a passion. And I think that if we could just recreate that, or allow that curiosity to be something that's driving our education, then I think that public education as a formal learning setting is still very viable. Like if we were able to find a way not to crush that sort of childhood curiosity through formal education, then that would absolutely still carry a lot of value. But even outside of that, just exposure to all of the fields is a great way to find what you're curious about. So I definitely think public education as a whole, its job is to show you everything and hope that maybe something sparks something in like your curiosity.
I really like that. Because, right, like, I don't think Peter, I mean, I was a public educator for a decade. You're still a public educator, Peter. There's like a lot of good. And so it's refreshing to hear from a student, because it can be easy to just kind of dump on a system, and say, there are problems in any system. And so for you to point out like some positives in that baseline, but then also say like, look, it seems, right? I just met you, Caden, but it seems like you have this inherent natural cadence for learning and like finding that curiosity in everything that you do. I had that growing up, and it was like very easy for me to pull out and connect. So I'm curious, because I'm like, you have that zest for learning, and you talk about like trying to prevent people from crushing this, childhood curiosity. Have there been moments in your education that you have seen that has kind of helped you or your peers either within the traditional setting or outside the traditional setting that maybe we're missing as educators in the system that the system could also do better to enhance this kind of idea that you're bringing forth?
I think that the best way that I can sort of pick out where that curiosity and like drive to learn comes from is actually by looking at like a time when I did not have that. And a time when I didn't have that was definitely over like when we were, I always joke that it's COVID break because we were out and not really learning at all because teachers were still trying to figure out how to like get used to this new setting, and students were kind of treating their education like a podcast where it's like you listen to it kind of while you do your other stuff. But I mean, I can personally relate to that. My first biology class I ever took, I listened to it like it was a podcast. But sort of like losing that motivation and that drive to learn. The only way that I was able to really get it back was from the excitement of coming back to school and like having that social, those discussions with teachers, analyzing stuff, especially within the humanities, getting back into analyzing literature, having those conversations. And then, like I said, sort of R.C. Walden, watching those videos and thinking about how I can become a better person through my learning sort of drove me to really dive into it more deeply. So I think that's something that really inspires students to get into education in that way is almost this romantic view of the positives of education, even if it just comes from the social aspect of having those conversations about these topics that interest you, or even just romanticizing the learning process itself. I mean, I have to say, I've definitely done my fair share. I have right now a textbook. I have to read 70 pages of British poetry by the end of the week. So I have to sort of romanticize some of that hard work and get into why it's so interesting to me, why it's beautiful, why this like learning process matters. And so I think that viewing it as something that is valuable to your growth and something that is enjoyable is really, it facilitates that curiosity. When it's given to you as something that you have to do, something that you need to do to be successful or to get a good job, that is not motivating to many young people. And by having that curiosity killed so early on, there's really no chance for you in your later years and post-secondary education to not view it as a chore.
I see that a lot. As a matter of fact, I have the conversations with my students. I'm on the business side of things. So it's, we look at kind of, I guess we call it the entrepreneurial mindset or the growth mindset. I mean, however else you want to say it. And then we start talking about short-term versus long-term, right? And we know, obviously short-term is something that many of our kids they'll look at short-term wins, whether it's on a phone or just somewhere else, doing the other things while you're listening to biology class as a podcast. I love that. So I just kind of wanted to ask you then, so as we kind of came back-ish from pandemic or whatever the break was, what are like some ways, you mentioned YouTube, but like what are some ways and tools that you use to connect kind of your learning to reality, because you've figured out a lot of different ways to kind of adapt this to you and how it really is going to affect you later on in life. So do you have any tools or suggestions that maybe schools could use and or your fellow students could use?
For me, it was sort of a very personal kind of process, because I happened of course we can all relate to spending a lot of time around most like of our family all the time and starting to see some of those fractures a little bit. And for me, something that I was able to do to connect my learning to reality was the study of literature that I was getting into actually really taught me how to reflect and how to kind of analyze situations in a way that is legitimately effective. And something that I was able to do was use that skill to write a lot of reflections on people in my life, on my family, and get to better understand the things that were happening to me as being things that are just happening in the world. And so I think that going out of my way to reflect on just regular occurrences in life, that was a way that I was personally able to use a lot of the skills that I was taught in the classroom. And from there, it kind of developed those skills into something that I find really fascinating about education. And it pretty much caused me to end up, now I'm a TA for 2 English teachers because I really enjoy analyzing stuff and talking about why themes and motifs matter and like all of that type of thing. So really just finding ways to integrate it into my life that are not just technical. Like going into work one day, you're going to need to, like, if you're a chemistry teacher, you of course have to know chemistry for teaching that class. But you don't necessarily need to know certain things, but it definitely helps to be good at reading a situation, analyzing people in your life and their pathology or or social structures, like knowing sociology, knowing literature, knowing philosophy really can help you with your worldview and the people in your life. And I definitely think that finding connections in ways that you wouldn't even really expect, you can attribute a lot of that to education, which for me made me just more curious to, better that part of my mind.
I love how you like disrupt your own education through your own curiosity. Like, I mean, it's really beautiful to hear the way you talk about it. And I love the phrase that you used earlier with like romanticizing your learning. And like, it is that falling in love process. So not only do you have this beautiful story so far with just kind of igniting your own kind of joy of learning, and it's really is beautiful to see. But like, what are you doing and what are you looking for in your own educational experience moving forward? Because it doesn't sound like the traditional model now is like really gonna maybe be what you do, right? Like, so what does education, and you're in this early college program, like what are you looking for, not only in anything post-secondary, but like in a work environment, like what are some thoughts that you have right now as a high school senior, what you're looking for moving outside of this beyond this next year?
There's kind of a lot, so I'll kind of break it into pieces.
Perfect.
For post-secondary education, I want to go to a liberal arts school and study all kinds of kind of intersectional and interdisciplinary styles of like education. I want to get into philosophy and literature and biology and astrophysics and all this stuff and connect all of it. I think that would be definitely my best path because and all of these like skills that are taught in post-secondary liberal arts education, like understanding critical thinking and developing those skills further. That's what I'm really looking for in like undergrad level. I also plan on becoming I want to be a doctor, but I want to be a neurologist and kind of work on like the science that's a little bit more theoretical and unknown right now, as definitely the human brain is a little bit confusing. And so I want to get really into that with research, but also like medical application and all of that. So in terms of my like education and my career, I am following a little bit more of a traditional path. But outside of that, I can reference something that I actually did yesterday, which was that I just met with a professor at Dartmouth who teaches inverse spectral geometry. And it was a very interesting mock course that I took when I went to Dartmouth Bound. And I connected with the professor afterward and got all of his contact stuff. And it was really interesting to have that discussion with him yesterday, talking about all of the intersections of like this theoretical topology that seems like it has no application, having such an interesting like effect on how we view like the universe and all of these really abstract like astrophysical concepts and all of these big questions that seem unanswerable are so like ingrained into this math and everything. And so outside of my like actual formal education, I've already started working with professors at universities, and studying things that I find to be not just related to my academic interests, especially within like STEM fields, but also within the philosophical interests that I have. Like talking about absurdism and existentialism has so much to do with how we are viewing the shape of our universe. Like all of these big concepts that seem so scientific and technical have such like massive philosophical consequences. And so outside of my formal education, I want to connect those ideas of like, especially with me, it's always French philosophy, those French philosophical ideas to like actual science and application. And so that exists totally outside of my actual formal education. Um, but yeah, that's how I plan on proceeding, like learning on my own time through texts, but then also having discussions with people who specialize in these fields and getting an interest that's kind of like a jack of all trades, but with just things that I happen to be interested in.
Nothing much, Alli. Nothing much. I don't think he's interested in that much. No, what's interesting
nothing
there,
at all.
right? It's interesting, but it's almost like you're writing your dissertation for your doctorate already, dude. Like this is amazing because, I mean, you have that go-to. So there's so many things like reaching out to a professor, communicating, networking. The combining of a lot of your interests. Keep going back to French philosophy. I love it. But you found your core. And be careful because I know a very, very, very awesome superintendent of a high school system here in Chicago that is a neurological, like he did his studies on neurology. So you might become a superintendent and redo this whole thing. So, but with that being said, here's kind of the big question. Man, we know educational systems, and especially you kind of talked about it after ninth grade a little bit, but kind of expand on if you had your own to design that system of the future. We know that, systems have their goods and their bads, but to hopefully incorporate the humanistic side of learning, how would Caden, as the person who's going to design this school system, how would you do it?
Well, I always joke that I have sort of a radical viewpoint on this because I sort of have two general ideas of what I would like to see. For one, I am a very, I hold very tightly to the idea of being like a modern Renaissance man. So I talk about that a lot in my writing and some of the speeches I've done in the past. But that idea of learning based on that curiosity, being like a polymath in all of these interesting fields that are really personal and important to the individual learner, I find that to be extremely important. And so in an ideal world, I would kind of revert back to that almost like Renaissance style of learning, where you're tutored in fields that you're interested in. And those who choose to learn abstract philosophies and those who choose to learn technical fields can do that. However, in a modern in a modern world where there's public education and we need sort of a uniform level of education among most adults, I find that right about up to eighth grade, I think that after middle school, you should be able to apply into a school that will take you wherever you need to go. I think that if you want to go down that compulsory high school path, where you're learning sort of all over the place so that you can figure out what you're interested in, I think that that's super important and we should definitely have that. But I definitely think that choice schools, like the magnet school that I go to right now, should be significantly more present. We sort of like keep them down low. We don't really talk about them very much. And I definitely think that sort of looking into your future as something that is entirely within your control, not just after you graduate, but from the beginning, following that curiosity wherever it takes you, should be possible. You should be able to go somewhere where you can do that. And we shouldn't be holding people back just because we want to make sure that it's entirely uniform right up until you're an adult. Like, that's not working. not only is it not working because people are unhappy with the system and we're having a massive exodus of teachers, but it's not working because we aren't even learning what we are setting out to learn. If you ask someone on the street right now to tell you what a Golgi body is, they're not going to know. Like, I guarantee that they do not remember that high school biology course because they weren't interested in it. They might have gotten an A in the course, but they're not learning. And I think that if they were able to follow that curiosity where it takes them, they would remember what they are learning. And learning outside of school when you're in school is extremely, extremely hard. Like, I can definitely relate to people not necessarily wanting to read for pleasure, not really wanting to read complicated philosophy texts outside of school because you already have so much going on that trying to do that, it's just really not possible. And so I think that school structures should be made to what the population wants. If there are people who want to go to technically, my early college program is for technical use, but because there aren't really any other programs like it, we have a lot of students who go in who want to go into higher ed, even though it's really for people who want to be a welder or want to do like CTEs. We don't have those opportunities. And so you'll find lots of people like me who want to go into undergraduate and even postgraduate education. But because we don't have those opportunities, we're forced to kind of use what is there. So I definitely think that after middle school, you are capable of knowing what you generally want to go into. Even if you're not sure what field, you kind of have an idea of where you want to see yourself in life. And I think that should be like an option, especially if public ed is paying so much money already into a system that's not working. We should be spending the money on at least something that might be useful and unique.
Let's build it, Alli.
I know. I really love, so, as I'm hearing so many gems come through with what you're saying there, Caden, and a couple of them is, more flexibility in the system. It does sound a lot like that. It is an older model. It's almost like the apprenticeship model of learning, right? So you have these experts and you're kind of crafting that on your own. But what I really like about your perspective is that you actually want to go into a technical field that is going to require the traditional model, and yet you're carving out your own untraditional route for learning and your own curiosities. And yet, for some, you also address kind of the issues with the time aspect and, the potential for it being too much learning. But if the system itself could support this more Renaissance idea where people are able to study from experts and carve their way kind of faster and more direct from the experts that themselves have already curated this knowledge, it could really open doors for these more intersection of fields. Because it sounds like you are able to, at your current time, kind of dally in all of this and expose yourself to so much. But why can't that be for more people? And then why can't the system kind of create this environment for people to work through? So I'm in love with this model.
Right.
It definitely seems to me like the only benefit of a system one that exists right now is really to kind of spy on how teachers are teaching. It's really not useful to the students. It's more just to control how they're learning. And I definitely think that, and something I've talked about a lot in the past is I am a huge advocate for the liberal arts, not necessarily because I find that STEM fields are, bad and you shouldn't go into them, but because I think with the liberal arts, it's hard to test and they're being erased because of that. When they can't control something by testing it, it just seems like they're going to continue to suppress it more and more until it disappears. I mean, you can see in middle schools that there are elective courses that aren't really even courses, just called STEM, where you learn all of these different technical skills that are entirely unnecessary. We're pushing kids into career-oriented education, which is not the purpose of primary education, at least. And so, yeah, it definitely feels like a reach for control over educators more than a way to actually benefit the students.
if you can fit in there in that amazing future that you're having right now, maybe, you know, becoming an educational policy leader, I'm in there for you, man. Like, it is awesome. It is super humbling to hear. The controlling issues, I think, is very prevalent in the system, whether it's students or educators. You know, you're hitting everything on the spot here. Want to wrap up, number one, by thanking you for really just sharing your rogue, but I would say it's not just rogue. I think it's a slightly ahead of your time, but I hope not too far ahead of your time, because you are the youth. You are experiencing this and really just making some of it. You know, and I don't even have you in class. I probably learned more about myself with you in my class, which would be awesome. But thank you for sharing everything. I want to give you an opportunity to share some of your connects. Like, how can people connect with Caden? And by the way, every single college or university out there should probably give this guy a free ride. I'm just going to throw that out there. But yeah, how can they connect with you, Caden?
I'm on LinkedIn if you just search Caden Ketchman. I'm also on Instagram if you search Caden Ketchman. I don't really use too many other platforms, but I do have a few videos on YouTube, one of which is me doing a speech actually very similar to what I've talked about today. You can also search some of my writing if you type in my name and an article. And so, yeah, those are the best ways to connect with me. But if you want to connect with me very quickly, LinkedIn is definitely the way to do so.
Thank you so much, man. We appreciate the conversation. Alli, any final thoughts?
My final thought for today with Caden is that let's bring back the romantic renaissance of learning. Let's fall in love with learning all over again, and that starts with getting curious.
Thank you so much, Caden. For Alli, Privitt, I'm Peter Hostrawser. Thank you so much for hanging out with us on Disrupt Education.